large family, in our community, in our tribe, that I always thought there has to be another way. Segueing from the wonderful presentation of our colleague, she mentioned a couple things that I think really resonate with me, and I imagine with you also. The first and foremost being that there are just really so many ironies to peacemaking. And it's really kind of hard to get your head and mind around this concept of peacemaking. And I love the question of our colleague, I'm new to peacemaking, I'm not really quite sure what it is. And I think being a student of conflict, a student of peacemaking myself, I don't claim expertise, but I sure claim a lot of curiosity about it. And so what is really peacemaking anyway? And in order to kind of answer that question, I want to backpedal a little bit and provide you with a notion of this continuum, right? This continuum of peacemaking. And we're all on this continuum on one side or the other, and many of us somewhere, I would imagine, in the middle. But the irony is, especially for Indigenous people, and the biggest irony is that the very people who created peacemaking, the very peoples that created so many different peacemaking opportunities, processes, are the very people now who desperately need peacemaking in our communities. So I find that to be quite ironic. It was mentioned Ho'oponopono, the Native Hawaiians, the Cape peoples up in Alaska, the people in Africa, South Africa, Desmond Tutu, Ubuntu. So all these different peoples who are in such disarray, mine included, we come to the table on our knees regarding peacemaking. The other irony is, we kind of push each other into peacemaking. You do it, you know more, you do it. And that's kind of how it began for me about 15 or so years ago. Our tribal court had a call to the community to learn about peacemaking and actually to become certified in mediation. And because I'm a curious person, I volunteered, and the discovery of possibility to heal ourselves from within is very fulfilling, and it's compelling, and it's frustrating at times, because we are unable to put, I think, peacemaking in a nice little tidy box and give it to anybody. It really is a process that is individual based. It's guided by principles that can be taught but must be modeled first. So, I wanted to kind of step out and encapsulate this wonderful, crazy notion of peacemaking, and to kind of put you in a safe place in terms of comfort zone, because I think it's safe to say that we all can learn more, we all can do more. And the thing that I absolutely love about these kinds of conferences is that it gives us an opportunity to see each other, to know each other better, more, and to share information that we all need. I do want to call your attention and kind of step out of the presenter mode and into the cheerleader mode for a minute, and remind you about the survey that is in your packet. As an advisory member to NARF on their Indigenous Peacemaking Initiative, one of the things that I've come to learn about NARF is they are a Native champion for all of us. And so NARF really needs to demonstrate impact, to demonstrate they need to stake themselves down, so to speak, in order to champion this peacemaking cause. So I really want to give credence to what Brett had mentioned regarding demonstrating presence. And so if you take a few minutes yet at the end of this presentation, I would definitely appreciate it. And most importantly, NARF would appreciate it. So again, the peacemaking is not, contained in this little box here for you. There's many different kinds of things in this peacemaking box, but it's not a one-size-fits-all. So I've always been of the mind that we all have a chair at this peacemaking table, whether you call it talking circles, mediation, a circle of elders, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of flexibility in what you name it, but it is a process. And because of our diverse tribal backgrounds and differences, not every peacemaking program or offering is going to match mine or Nikki's or Michael's. But having said that, there are definite similarities. There's a foundation for peacemaking. And we think about some of the strengths of our tribal nations, and that was mentioned by many of us when we worked in the small groups regarding the importance of family, children, our elders. We're place-based people in terms of connections to our lands and sacred places, and that we work really hard to create relationship, not just the two-leggeds, but other ways to create connections with our Creator. In terms of some of the challenges I think that we all face, we've had a tsunami of traumatic experiences that have caused us all great hardship. And some of those were mentioned earlier. But because, and we all know what those challenges are, but because of these challenges, many of our nations and communities struggle. So we're looking for something that to make this dark cloud go away. What was mentioned earlier in the list and some of the PowerPoints were some of the symbolisms that help create this peacemaking process. And one of the things I've been sad about in kind of knowing more about peacemaking is how, for example, colors that were and do signify, the sacred directions, are now affiliated with gang affiliation. Another symbol that I think many tribal nations can relate to is that of the circle. And, there's so much strength there. But what I also recognize is that the circle has come to also mean a circle of violence. Because think about, some of us, can remember back in high school when a fight broke out and what happened. A circle formed around the two people. So something as sacred and symbolic as a circle has been kind of perverted into a circle of violence. So we have so much work ahead of us. In part, I wanted to mainly give and relay the message that peacemaking does not happen in a vacuum. And what does that really mean? It means that none of us individually can create this process for our nation, for our community. We need to do that in concert with others. Our chief tribal judge, some of you may have met him at various conferences, Judge Marshall, who's been on the bench at Rosebud now for 30 years, has told the story about growing up in a very traditional community at home. And there were many elders in the community. And he says, I don't remember much about violence. It just wasn't present. Because, about 10-ish years ago, my hope was that the tribal court could get much more involved in the peacemaking process. And he said, really, that belongs in the community, because that was his experience, that problems were taken care of by the grandparents, our ujis, our lalas, that they handled that. They were the natural peacemakers traditionally. And then as he learned more about, probably begrudgingly, to the fact that now tribal courts have become the grandparent, the unchi, the lalas of our tribal communities regarding conflict. And so that shift has been made. And it's a sad shift, but it's the reality of where we're at for many of our communities. And so now he's of the mind that, yes, we do need to have peacemaking in tribal court as an offering of what we can provide to the community. Underscoring that there are many different kinds of organizations in our homelands. Many of you represent tribal courts. There are K-12, there are perhaps tribal colleges, there are tribal programs, and fortunately, the more educated we become, the better we are at forming healthy, vibrant, collaborative relationships. Do you agree? How many agree with that? Yeah. Repeat it. Well, I love your slide that you had up that we need to re-educate the educated, because if your homeland, if your community, if your tribe is one where there's harmony among your tribal program directors, your council leadership, your elected leadership, that is fantastic. But oftentimes that is not the case. Education really doesn't have much to do with, in terms of formal education, about our ability to make nice and play well in the sandbox. We have to be taught that. Just like we need to feed ourselves. We're fortunate to have been raised with grandparents taught us, but there's just a lot of friction and conflict in our working communities at the adult level. And so part of what I want to accomplish today is to generate discussion. And to do that, I came across recently this really wonderful, it's a really short video on an idea, an entry point into how we can understand the impact of conflict in our communities, and perhaps how we can all increase our skill sets and widen our gaze to bring in other collaborators. So we're going to start this video, and then I invite you just to kind of sit back and relax and enjoy. I'm sorry we don't have popcorn for you. Wanted to get
some initial reactions from people just about your comments, reactions to the video. Anyone? About 3 or 4?
Well, what I saw was malicious gossip, and it's hard to resist listening to it. When someone comes to you with a great story about who's doing what to who, or what they're thinking or plotting, it's just hard not to listen unless it's not necessarily immediate community outside too. And then it's kind of fun to spread it even though you know it's gossip. And I have to resist it and realize that it makes everybody sick. And gossip for real many people you're talking about.
Someone else?
I just wanted to say that what it brings to light for me is how difficult these kinds of things are in a Native community, because everybody knows each other, and oftentimes if we live there, we work together, and we see each other after work and before work and on weekends, and on the outside, in an outside community, those things might happen at work, but then they kind of stay at work, But inside the Indian community, they bleed over into everything else. And then when you have a little problem, it can become a huge problem, and people choose sides, and everybody remembers what happened before, and that comes into it somehow, at least on an emotional level, and ends up affecting lives. And I see peacemaking as the only way that I know of right now that can maybe have an influence on making that heal. And I guess like the traditional method, the adversarial method, somebody wins and loses and that can't fix it. But this has a chance.
Somebody over there?
I think that's a very common problem with everyone. Everybody's who's in business or where. But the only real solution is communication. I think probably the circles, things like that could be a big help in solving that.
I was struck by what he said. This is the way the game is played. It struck me because it seemed like such a capitalist notion, not one that we came with, but one that was brought to us. It's not enough for me to win, everyone else has to lose too. Instead of all of us need to win together. And yet he just took it as that's the way it is.
Just wanted to add that a Dakota woman said to me one time that our culture was to talk good about people and say only good things. If you were in some kind of a format where a person's qualities were being addressed to a community, someone else would speak to qualities, not that person themselves. And because of the oppression and the things that have happened to us over the centuries, we've turned that into doing the same thing, but now we're doing it negatively, and that's gossip. So I never forgot that. And so every time I see this kind of stuff, I think of our words. Which
Final comment?
I think the power of this video is such that what lessons can we all learn from that as peacemakers? And it's overwhelming because on some level, you're absolutely right. We're related to everybody. We know everybody. Certainly elders remember me when I was young. The complexity and all the dynamics that come into our communities are at play in this video. And I think the more that we can raise awareness for each other and hold each other in check is a dynamic that needs to begin. And, you know, if we look at peacemaking as a big circle, and one slice of the pie perhaps deals with lateral violence, or internalized oppression is another concept where we disregard our language, we disregard our culture, we disregard our Indianness for the sake of fitting into, you know, the white world, the mainstream. And it was really interesting because about 8 years ago or so, there was this discussion at home about bringing peacemaking into the community. And there were primarily all Native trained attorneys present. And, you know, as attorneys, my older brother's an attorney, my cousin's an attorney, my best friend's an attorney. You know, that you've worked very hard for those credentials. I know it. During this panel, the one non-native, the one white guy was the only one to say, well, what about peacemaking? What was in your culture? And I found that to be so ironic that it was the white guy in the group that was promoting the concept. And that's internalized oppression, that we don't feel like we have the capacity to bring our culture with us in our field of work. And so I wanted to show this primarily because for me, and I've seen it a number of times now, you know, it moved something in me and it changed me, I think for the better, but it also, I recognized in myself how much more I need to do, because peacemaking first begins with us as individuals, correct? Okay. Brett, did you want to add something to this? We have just a couple of more minutes. I wondered if you wanted to turn, maybe the first table turn, and if there's just a couple of you, join others, and create some questions that you have about peacemaking as it impacts the concept of lateral violence. And that way, we hope that some of us presenting, or if you have expertise, that the responses or the answers will come out through the next day and a half. So if you would mind forming groups, however many make sense to you, write down some questions that you have, linking the concept of peacemaking with the realities of our communities. Because sometimes it feels like it's too big of a quantum leap to create more synergy or movement for peacemaking given the challenges in our community. Okay? So just take about 5-7 minutes.
Can you summarize that question one more time?
Link the video to peacemaking and develop some questions that you have. Okay? And you'll do that in concert with others. I mean, I hope that you'll visit and talk, and I'm not going to grade your papers, you know, I'm not going to pull out that professorial red pens. So please join others, and ideally with people that you haven't met. Ideally with people that you haven't met. So if you want to join another group, that would be lovely. Yeah. Are we ready? Are there any judges in here who brought their gavel? Okay. All right, highlights of each group. Ready?
Okay, so we're not quite sure what we were supposed to do, honestly. But we thought about, in this situation, that peacemaking, the circle, the talking circle, would have helped to communicate. And we thought that maybe the Human Resources Department, if there was like a regular circle, like once a month or once a week, or there's a way to initiate one that was easy for someone to come up and say, we need a circle. And the requirement is everybody who works has to be there. Everyone has to say something and has to be allowed to speak. That maybe that would have helped to clear the air, hopefully. We couldn't figure out the hierarchy in the video exactly, but we thought that that could work in other situations where, like in schools and in our youth and elders and just having regular circles in them where maybe a piece is involved, maybe they're not, maybe it is just a conversation that's taught, the principle that's taught the peacemaking, but that they could have a situation where people are learning to communicate more and having the courage to be able to speak up and say what they're feeling is wrong. Here.
In a minute or less.
This is a challenge, Dave.
You don't know me well. We talked about how the Native community might convince some of the non-Natives that peacemaking tools might work better, as has been mentioned. And one of the questions that was posed, and I think it's an interesting one, is what conflicts might exist where peacemaking would not work. And I'm not sure I know the answer. We mentioned maybe in a strict contractual breach instance where there was sort of liquidated damages. I mean, either the contract's broken or it wasn't, and either the damages are what they are, or maybe there's some way that peacemaking might work its way into that, but that was what we ended on. And I did it in less than a minute.
In our group, we felt the same way. We weren't really certain what we were supposed to talk about, but one of the things that we did mention is that in this video, we've seen that there were lies, there was manipulation, and there was also greed. The individual that started, I guess, the issue, the man, he's the one I think that really needed to come to the table, and then as well as the young lady that was doing the gossiping. To me, it seemed as though she really was being used to spread the gossip, and therefore she needed to be a part of the table, or the healing. I guess that's how.
Yeah, there's no wrong answers here. It was intentionally brought.
We were kind of all over the page and everything but specifically what we talked about was, it seems to me that the level of violence is happening even at the highest level, and unbeknownst to them, the way that we talk, and I'm talking about the highest level of power on a government Indian reservation, this perhaps could be the tribal council level and also tribal administration level, and it comes from there. So I think it's very important. How are we going to resolve this at a peacemaker level? First of all, I think that we would have to get a buy-in from the people with authority, which is a tribal council level, to get the buy-in of what are we doing to our own people by discriminating them because you're half white and you're not half Coshada or Cherokee, whatever, and I was saying that I'm guilty myself of saying that, well, what do you know? You don't even speak our language, that type of thing, and it does hurt them. So I think it's very important for the peacemaker level to sit down and just talk about what do we need to do to get the buy-in from the tribal council, and let's start from there. and work at their peacemaker level.
Yes, I don't know if this happens where you're at, or where I'm at. New people, they may have been like a garbage truck collector one day, the next day they're on tribal council, and all of a sudden they know everything, they're all powerful. Yes. So that's another similarity we share. Yeah.
We talked about lateral violence and internalized depression, and the fact that the peacemaker in a sequestered setting like on the res is living in a fishbowl all the time, is scrutinized all day long, and has to set that example all day long, because if you don't, then people say, oh, well, that person's, I don't have to listen to that. They're human after all. But that's the point. It's difficult. Instead of just preparing for the peacemaking, that person is kind of expected to be that peacemaker 24/7, which is really not fair and difficult to be on your game 100% of the time. Also, we talked about peacemaking itself. Where does it start? And really, it starts within ourselves. We have to find that peace within ourselves first. Then it will be much easier to lead others to it.
And that's an aspect of internalized depression, right? We've never known power before, so when we get a little bit, we hold on to it for dear life. So that's why our truck drivers sometimes become kings, I suppose.
At our table, we discussed how do you get people to commit to peacemaking. I know at our reservation, I'll use the word victim, or maybe the spouse will file a petition, but the other party has to agree to come in too. So, and we deal only with facts, not fiction. They might have been at a local joint the Saturday before they appeared in court. We don't talk about that. We talk about the issue on the petition, and it has worked well for us.
Okay, our group touched on several points. One thing was how peacemaking is implemented, because it's often spoken that peacemaking should be used, but actually implementing it in various situations and cases is a whole different thing. Another point that we hit on was how gossip within the community is just so prevalent oftentimes in Indian country, and it really does exacerbate the situation. I like what was just suggested, where you just stick to the point of the law and what's before you, and leave personal outside matters outside. And then also we discussed universal values and the way that everyone cares how they're treated. They want to be respected. They want their children to be respected, and so that's what should be considered and put in place when you're discussing peacemaking.
I just want to close with a simple statement. And, oh, I think you went first, didn't you? Oh, I'm so sorry. See, and that's another thing. Point out mistakes, and then I said I'm sorry. Big people should say I'm sorry more often.
Trying to be helpful,
I think we get trouble coming up with a question, but I just heard from over there, that's something that sprung to mind, the question, we only we were brand new, we just had our first case, we do the child custody, and the problem that's vexing us right now, you know, we get the child custody taken care of, but how do we get the mother to come in? She doesn't show up. She feels she's being judged. She already knows she's being judged, and that would be because of the gossip or that lateral violence that we're talking about, Phil talks about. She doesn't trust. She expects to be judged. She expects to always be wrong. And the truth is, she is a screw up, but we would try to treat her fairly. And maybe get some healing going if we could just get her to show up. So how do you get even a member that would show up?
Have all the groups had input. You've posed good questions, of course, and you've had excellent insights. And, you know, I hope that you struggle with these concepts, because it's through struggle, and I'm really glad to hear, while we weren't sure exactly what we were supposed to do, that's the struggle, and it builds curiosity, and it makes us want to learn more. And, you know, I never want to say that I'm an expert at this, because there's always more to learn, and in your capacity as judges and attorneys, you're learning constantly, and this is just another new point to bring to the table. The connections between peacemaking and the video are complex and multiple. I hope that it sits with you for a while, and I know the first time that I seen this video, I'm kind of a journaler, so I took time and I journaled a bit, because this is so impactful. It was to me the first time I seen it, and it's raw in many ways. And so if you need an outlet, that's one outlet that you might want to consider in terms of just putting your thoughts down on paper and then letting your questions settle as a way to deal with it right now, and then to move on to lunch in the next sessions, okay? All right, lunchtime on your own, and we are back at 1:30. Thank you, everyone.